you so much for joining us today on our series. We're really excited to interview you and hear about your experiences. So I'm just going to dive right in and ask you, obviously over the last 18 months, the world has been focused on COVID, and now a lot of the world is focused on what's happening in Afghanistan. It's a tumultuous time. But if you could really give our audience a sense of what you're working on, what you do, and what your kind of work portfolio is, so we can start the conversation.
So UNESCO is an organization of 193 member states. So we are 193 ambassadors to UNESCO, each representing our respective country. So the first duty is a multilateral duty, is to implement the multilateral aim of the United Nations, meaning to discuss together, to create a network of people representing their countries. And because as much as we talk, as much as we negotiate, the hope of keeping conflicts at bay is alive. And this is our very aim in the United Nations world, in the multilateral world, in the diplomatic world. Second, because UNESCO is the United Nations for Education, Science and Culture, our aim is to implement the mandate and to explain a little bit more what is UNESCO's mandate. We can remind ourselves of the Constitutive Act preamble, the UNESCO's Constitutive Act preamble, which says, whereas it is in the hearts and minds of men and women that wars are invented, it is in the hearts and minds of men and women that we have to put the seeds of peace through education, science, and culture. So this is in general terms. That was in 1945. We are in 2021. Since then, we have overcome the Cold War, many other international issues. But as you mentioned at the outset, we are confronted to a number of crises. And for example, you were mentioning COVID. During the COVID, our aim was really to make sure that education was not that much disrupted, that all those students, children who were not able to go to school or to university, how could we make the maximum so that they had access to some type of education, knowledge sharing and everything. It's not easy. And it's not easy because it's not the UNESCO which decides on behalf of member states and their governments, because education is a sovereign task as much as defense or foreign affairs. And it's member states who decide in their own sovereignty how they're going to educate their people, with which programs and so on. But still, we tried to bring education to the maximum of people by helping providing some support to the governments and to the education community. Second, in the field of culture, UNESCO works on the basis of a number of conventions. I might come back to it. I don't know what you have in your questionnaire. Maybe I can do it right now. I will spell out all the cultural conventions that we have. But basically, during the COVID crisis, the issue was to make sure that artists, people working in the cultural sector, but also when we talk about culture, we talk about culture in the wide sense, meaning also heritage. All the people managing the heritage sites that had closed, those people who were therefore without a job or were not able to maintain the heritage sites, how could we reach out to them? Which type of program could we have? How could we maintain, nevertheless, the heritage sites? These are some of the issues. In the science field, we have the two areas of science. We have hard science, where we now deal with the fight against climate change. And so there are some programs like Man and Biosphere, where we make sure that the environment is maintained and well preserved, but also people are well included in the overall framework of keeping the environment safe. And you have also the other side, which is the social sciences. And there you have a huge, you can imagine social sciences is huge, a huge number of cooperation that bring, or that are supposed to bring all member states and people together. Now, in the field of social sciences, there can be in any field. We are in the UN, we are in the multilateral world, we are on the planet. So the planet is not rosy, right? We have conflicts everywhere, or diverging views. And we have, my aim and my way of seeing things is that we have to name the divergences, because sometimes some diplomats would try to you know, put them under a carpet or pretend that everything is fine. But I don't think that this is how we manage conflicts. We have to know what the problem is. We have to spell it out, and we have to look at our interlocutors in the eyes and tell them, listen, I don't have the same view as yours. You don't have the same view as me. We know it, but nevertheless, we have the mandate of the UN, the mandate of UNESCO to implement. And above all, our mandate is to care about the people, about their individuality, individual safety, and protection of individual rights and freedoms. So this is, and on that basis, we try to reunite everyone, which is not obvious at all. I give you an example. The example in social sciences, for example, China is promoting its Silk and Road initiative. And China knows, everyone knows that the Silk and Road initiative is a true instrument of influence of China, which does not have the same type of fundamentals as the UN Charter or the UN Declaration on Human Rights, for example, just to stay basic. There is also another member state that has proposed to organize a cooperation among some universities on the study. And I mentioned that precisely because you are a program on democracy, on the promotion of democracy. And this member state has proposed to study the norms of international relations on the premises, intellectual premises, that the rules on which we function now are not efficient anymore. Hence, we have to change them. And they have to change them. They should study the pros and cons of each political regime, including democracy. So this is something which is very interesting, because for us, and in the UN Charter, in the UNESCO Constitutive Act, the basic thing which reunites us is the promotion of democracy.
For many people who are familiar with even with the UN system and UNESCO, people see it as a, you know, sort of an arts and culture organization, and don't see the breadth of the other work that you do in terms of education, obviously arts and culture and heritage, but also in the research and science kind of work. And so I think it's helpful for people to understand that, because you do play a unique role that I think is probably somewhat, you know, understood, if that's a word, or less understood than it probably should be. So thank you for that. But I think, and the examples are very helpful too, to give people a sense of how that plays into geopolitics. But I think one thing that would be interesting to talk about is, I think obviously we have a lot of conflict around the world, fragility, states that are potentially could have a conflict. And I think sometimes people have a hard time grasping how multilateral organizations like the UN and UNESCO can participate and be helpful in conflict prevention and mediation. So you touched on that a little bit, but I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that, because I do think it's a really interesting point about how these very large institutions can actually play a role in very unique, situations where conflict is either already existing or there is a potential for conflict.
UNESCO is not per se, or is not analyzed as you mentioned by the analysts or the researcher community as a conflict prevention or conflict management organization. And as you mentioned, it's somehow a mistake, because yes, by focusing on education, science, culture, and as education, science, and culture, as I mentioned them, UNESCO is actually a hugely powerful tool for peace and stability, and hugely powerful tool for, yes, conflict management and conflict prevention. By the aim, for example, in the field of culture, the aim being to explain to each other the culture of the others, to make, because the premise is also, again, of the Constitutive Act is that the Second World War happened, and all the horrors of the Second World War happened because there were some prejudices or racial prejudices that led to the killing, to the Shoah and everything, and it was because of ignorance. So to fight and to prevent that type of thing from happening again, you have to teach everyone history and who others are. And if we stick to the issue of anti-Semitism, for example, we contribute to a large number of programs on education on the fight against anti-Semitism. We also devise programs of education. We call that citizenship education, fight against racism and so on. So programs that will be offered to member states for every children in the planet to have the same level of education on those issues, to master the universal pacts on civil and political rights and on economic and social rights, to understand what universalism means, the universality in the sense of UN Charter, meaning that every individual, man or woman or any individual, wherever they live, they have a right to education, a right to freedom of thought, a right to freedom of religion, freedom of sexual orientation, men and women equality. So this is what we want to put in the programs. Then, for example, in the field of heritage, there is a large number of conventions, starting by the 1954 convention on the protection of heritage in times of conflict. Now, this is a convention which is key, and it is very important because it exists. Its only existence is already something hugely important, but unfortunately, it has not managed to prevent the destruction of the Buddha Bamiyans, the Bamiyan Buddha, to prevent the destruction of Palmyra, to prevent the destruction of manuscripts and houses in Mali, in Tombouctou. And we have a conscience that some destruction of heritage is ongoing in and around Karabakh, between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And the role of UNESCO should be, on the basis of this convention, to prevent this type of destruction. Unfortunately, we see that I gave those examples on purpose, that we did not manage to prevent that. But you mentioned Afghanistan. We hope, and we have an executive board very soon. And we hope that our executive board, meaning 58 member states, will be able to tell the international community and those who are in Afghanistan now that there should be no destruction of heritage anymore, and that there should be no looting of cultural goods, no trafficking, no illegal trafficking of cultural goods, because this illegal trafficking also feeds all types of illegal activity, money laundering, prostitution, human trafficking, weapons trafficking, all these things, and terrorism. Yeah. So this is also what UNESCO is about, by focusing on the protection of heritage in conflict, on fighting illegal trade of cultural goods, on protecting natural and cultural heritage, and also on protecting and promoting cultural diversity.
And I think that's it is such an interesting kind of lens into conflict, kind of the story of conflict, essentially. But I'm wondering, one thing you said I wanted to go back to, because I think it's really important as we talk to people in this series, and you said it's really important to kind of name what you disagree with someone about, and to look them in the eye and say, we don't agree on this. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that, because I think that is something that obviously is important to conflict prevention. If, you're able to resolve something by talking to people through diplomacy and diplomatic means, that can have a tremendous impact on so many people's lives. But it also obviously promotes values. And I think there's just so much in that statement that you made. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that and maybe have an example of how you were able to use that very candid conversation with someone to kind of move an issue forward.
Yes, thank you very much. Actually, I have examples which I will describe in UNESCO, but also I have many examples throughout my whole career, because this has been my own methodology. I don't know whether everyone uses it that way, or also as a statement of mind and of behavior and of career. But this is something which is very important for me. And for me, it happens to be a useful tool of negotiation, because once you put things on the table, it's like when you play chess, everything is on the table. There is nothing hidden. And you move your pieces with your partner, and in the end, yes, there is a winner. I don't think this is also something, because in the world of diplomacy, we keep talking about mutual interests and mutually reinforcing solutions and so on. I'm not sure that this is always the case. There is, in the end, always a winner and a loser. But the game, the common interest is won, because the game keeps going. So in this sense, there is no loser and winner, because we know that we can play a game again. But at each part of a negotiation or of a diplomatic or multilateral or any life, there is someone or a part which will step back for a while. I might give you an example of something which happened in UNESCO. We had a negotiation on an education tool which UNESCO has. It is called the International Bureau of Education. It is an institute, specialized institute of UNESCO, which aim is to look at the programs of education of any member state who is interested in having this looked by UNESCO, from the first year of kindergarten to the last year of medical studies, passing by mechanical studies or nursing or whatever. So if a member state needs some technical assistance to devise their programs, they can call this institute. This institute is based in Geneva, and at some stage, Switzerland had the feeling that they were first hosting as a host state the institute themselves and paying everything. So they wanted to revise the governance of the institute, meaning that they wanted every member state to contribute more, to put more money into the well-functioning of this institute. As usual, when you ask for money, nobody answers. And it lasted 1, 2, 3 years. And in the end, one comes and says, so it was then China who came and said, listen, I'm putting $8 million to bring this institute to Shanghai. So there was a negotiation started there. Some member states said, okay, now China is putting $8 million. Nobody has put that amount of money any time before. So let's bring everything to Shanghai. But we had, and a number of other member states had a different position. We said, this is a UN institute, so it should remain in a UN place, because it is only in a UN place that the principles of the UN, of UNESCO, will be promoted. Those principles that I mentioned at the outset: education to citizenship, education to human rights, education to democracy, which is the constitutional aim of UNESCO. So never sight should be lost of this aim. And we believe that it's only within UN premises or in a UN city that this can be promoted. Also, there were other issues of institutional that I will not bore our auditors with, but which were actually very key in the negotiation, meaning that you cannot invent something just because you put $8 million and just because you want something. So, you know, we said from the outset, this is not going to work. We don't want that. We don't want that. We can offer something else. If you want to have something in Shanghai, let's work something. But this will remain in Geneva, or minimum come back to headquarters of. And we found out that China has had a strong interest in bringing this to Shanghai. For which reason I will let the auditors make their own assessment. I cannot, spell it out clearly there. But we negotiated frankly, and there were some other parts, and maybe I think the UNESCO Secretariat was afraid that we were kind of going to a confrontation. They wanted us to have a compromise right away. And I personally, and some of my other ambassador colleagues, we said, no, we want to negotiate. We want to speak frankly with our, with the other parts, and we will see. Either we, in the end, through the discussion can take place. We have time. China has time too. The discussion can take place 1 day, 2 days, 1 year, 2 years, 10 years. For us, it will not go to Shanghai. No problem. And in the end, there was some type of agreement reached, where we decided that we would have 2 years or 3 years solution with putting some more money mechanism in this institute in Geneva. And we would come back to the issue 2 or 3 years after to check how it has worked and so on. Well, I don't know. Yeah. I hope I was very long, sorry.
Yes, okay. No, I think that's a really helpful example.
Okay.
Yeah. I want to shift gears just a little bit, because, as you know, part of this series is talking about the role of women in conflict prevention and resolution. So I want to kind of end with asking you about yourself. But before we do that, I want to ask you, because you've had such a long career and have seen so much in your diplomatic career, what role have you seen women play in conflict resolution, conflict prevention, that is some different perhaps than the role of men? How has women's leadership manifested itself in these really important kind of endeavors to try to create more stable and secure societies?
Yeah, that's a difficult question because I have not conceptualized. I have many life experience with women colleagues or with lots of women that I met throughout my different postings. So maybe I will respond with some examples or profiles of women that I met. Let's talk about Afghanistan, because I was under SEC for South Asia from 2010 to 2013, dealing a lot with Afghanistan, and I went there quite a lot. And there I met wonderful women. I met wonderful men too, amazing politicians, but I met wonderful women who became parliamentarians, who were doctors, and who were really strong politicians, dedicated to their country, working on with the everyone basically. And I hope that these strands can be preserved in Afghanistan, and that it should not be lost. It is in the interest of everyone and of those who took the power to work with them. We have all to make sure that they will remain. It was the same in Cambodia. I dealt with the Cambodian peace agreement and Cambodian refugees and internally displaced people repatriation. They're hugely remarkable women. One of them now is a personal friend. She became Secretary of State in Cambodia for cooperation. And because she worked a lot with the parties fighting for true democracy in Cambodia, at some stage she was a bit targeted, but she wanted to remain in her country. So she quit politics and she decided to work to support Cambodian artists. So these are, we can find examples everywhere. And I have met women ambassadors in my previous posting in the OSCE, Organization for Security and Cooperation in Vienna, and here in UNESCO, very dedicated. In Vienna, we created a program together to support some kind of tutorship program to support young girls who want to study in the field of security and diplomacy. And we organized a partnership with women in international security with, I guess you know this program, and it was great. I wanted to continue it here in UNESCO, but I didn't find the time to do it.
Well, my last question, because I think that those are great examples of all the different ways that women really make a difference in their societies and in building the capacity of others, is maybe you can talk a little bit about, to the extent you see the fact that you're a woman influencing your style or the work that you do, anything that you think would be helpful for our audience to know about how you've seen being a woman as part and parcel of your success.
Yeah, again, it's difficult to to step back and to watch yourself and analyze yourself. But my experience is I enjoy being a woman, and I have been able to pursue a career which I have enjoyed, loved, being a woman, and I enjoyed somehow I like you may understand that I like a little bit of confrontation and and fight, and I like to have something to gain, to fight for. And also of course my generation, we benefit from the fight that the elder generation has undertaken, and I thank my grandmother, mother, aunts who have had much more difficult lives, but still I never had so much difficulties being a woman. In fact, it was more as an advantage, but I never, if there was somewhere where some people would have implied some type of difference should be made, I never accepted that. But it showed in my behavior, so they didn't even try.
Well, it's helpful to hear all the experiences of the women we're interviewing, because they're different, but also just really communicate the strength of people's commitment and really work to create more democratic and stable societies. So I really want to thank you for doing the interview, and thank you, of course, for the work you do every day, because it does make such a difference. So thank you so much for joining us.
I thank you very much, and ready to contribute in any manner, and congratulations for everything you do.